Although nothing lasts forever, of course, and it's the same with this carving gouge. You've sharpened it and you've got it going really well, but it will go blunt. But how fast it goes blunt and how it goes blunt depends a lot on various factors, one of which is how you use it. But the most important thing to consider when we're thinking about how to blunten your gouge, how it goes blunt, is to think about the edge and the bevel as this, as a simple wedge of metal. So as I go on in the few things I'm going to say now, do bear in mind this idea that we're talking about a wedge of metal with bevels and a cutting edge here. And I would suggest that you ask yourself, if I was, reverse engineering it, if I was to blunten my gouge, what is the best way to do it? Anyway, let me just show you a few things and a bit of advice that will help you maintain the edge for as long as possible. Watch what happens here. As I push this gouge in, like so, this wedge of metal like this is going in, the pressure is released here. So I've got a shaving coming off like this. It's going in a straight line. I can give it a bit of a scoop like this, but the shaving is coming off, the pressure is being released. If I had to push this tool in here like this and then lever it like that without going forward, you can imagine that I would snap off or break or crumble or damage that fine edge. So this is one thing that students often do, is they come in and then instead of continuing the cut forward, they start levering like this. And that leverage damages the edge. It's micro damage perhaps, you wouldn't necessarily notice, but the next time you come along, then you're getting scratches and cuts on here. So that's a really important point. You want to make sure as you carve that the chip can be released. Okay, so as you come in, the chip can be released like this, the pressure's off, there's nothing going across the edge here. So try not to get anything going across the edge like that, and that includes scraping. What some students will do, what some carvers will do, is actually scrape something to get it clean. If you were to scrape this, then of course that's a good way to dull the edge. So don't use it for anything that's scraping or levering. Scraping and levering are definitely two things you don't want to do. So that's the first important thing. The way you carve, make sure the tool goes forwards, takes a complete cut, and there's shavings, pressure released. Blunt can also be a damage to the edge of the tool, and a very good way to damage the edge, this very fine edge that you've spent a long time getting sharp, is to ding it, to knock it, even lightly, against another tool. And this happens very often when you're carving. Instead of putting your tool down in a disciplined way that keeps all the edges separate, you toss the tool down and chink, before you know it, or you've knocked it, this edge bumps into that one. And the result is so that although everything else is looking nice and smooth, there is a scratch, what we call a snail mark, from where you've damaged the edge of the tool. And that is the only way to get out of that, is to reshape and that element of it. You don't need to have to do that if you are very painstaking about get into the habits of this bench discipline, putting your tools down carefully in a way that protects the edges. The other easy way, is to have something like rulers or the clamps like this, other metal objects, hard objects on the bench, and just don't, the thing knocks against it and you've damaged the edge. So make sure you protect your tools on the bench at all times. Ideally, when you're carving, this cut here leaves a nice shiny surface. And I've said that if you've got a damaged edge, you might leave a little snail track along there, a little scratch mark. But sometimes what people find is even though they've sharpened, they get lots of fine scratches along here. Lots of fine sharpness. They go back to sharpening it, come back, more fine scratches. So what's going on there? Well, what that almost certainly means is that this bevel, this bit here, if you see the bevel, this is too fine. This is too narrow an angle, and so it's very, very weak at the top here. And you can see that a fine angle like this is going to be a lot more delicate than a tougher angle like that. So that's one of the reasons why we put an inside bevel on. It's this whole idea of keeping a low cutting angle, which is what we want when we're carving, but adding a little bit of extra strength by bumping up this low angle here with an extra angle on the inside, so you get a compound bit. So if you're finding the edge crumbling, it's constantly going dull, the chances are your bevel's too fine, and rather than bring that back, you want to be adding more inside bevel. That's the way to get around that. The opposite problem that I see where carvers seem to have a tool that's blunt, it's more that the tool is hard work, because although it's sharp, in other words, the edge is fine, it's not crumbling, but it's just really hard work, and that's not because you've got really hard wood, it's because your bevel, the overall bevel, is too big now. Instead of being too delicate, it's now a big robust wedge of metal trying to push into the wood, and that of course is always going to be harder. Now, one of the main reasons for that, I find, is that the bevel has become rounded. So instead of carving at an angle here, to actually cut the wood, it's up here. That's where you're cutting the wood, and it means that the bevel's rounded. And one of the most common ways that happens is in the stropping. So I just want to mention that again. If it's really hard work, the chances are you might have to turn the bevel more from a fat one to a little bit longer. But you should also check that you're not stropping incorrectly. Now when you strop, this here is your cutting angle, pretty much how I'm going to cut the wood. So that's where that should be. Not up here, not too much lower, but around about there. And then you're going to hold it like this, put the pressure here, and you're going to draw it back. And what's important is that as you go back, this whole thing maintains the same angle all the time. What often happens, really, really often, despite even when I point it out, it's such a habit, is this. As you go back, you lift this handle, and what that does is it rounds this bevel over, so instead of cutting like this, it's cutting up here like that. So that's really, really important. So to stop your tools going dull, you need to strop them regularly, and you need to strop them correctly. Whether it's a power strop or a hand strop like this, you need to make sure that the handle is low, that you're covering all the bevel, and you're covering out this cutting angle and not lifting. So that's, having checked your bevel is not rounded, then you want to make sure that you're stropping like this. I'll put some links below this video about stropping and about this rounded bevel as well. Well, I hope those few ideas help you. The important thing is to think about the bevel as a wedge and how that works in the wood, and all those things that I've said follow along. Anyway, all the best with your carving.